Welcome back to This is VANCOLOUR. Our featured guest tonight is the Intergovernmental Affairs Officer to the Musqueam First Nation. He is also a board chair for the First Nations Health Council and a board member of Covenant House Vancouver. Currently seeking the Liberal nomination in Vancouver Quadra, he is Wade Grant, and this conversation is brought to you by Pacific Sands Beach Resort in Tofino, laid-back luxury, as beachfront as it gets. So Wade, last week on the show, BC Premier David Eby basically alluded to this idea that there is a polarization when it comes to Indigenous issues, and in fact, a deliberate politicization when it comes to relations between Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people. I got to ask you, what are you seeing in this current climate?
Well, Mo, and thanks for the question. Thanks for having me. I think that we see that people are using Indigenous rights, proven Indigenous territory as a way to mobilize people because for far too long in our province, the education and the understanding of Indigenous peoples and the rights and the title that they actually have and have been proven in the Supreme Court of Canada is something that people haven't truly learned. And so to be able to use that as a way to create an opportunity to divide people or have a dog whistle is a real easy target for people. And I've been seeing that more and more in the last 3-4 years.
And so why is that happening in the last 3 or 4 years? Because it seemed like the province was maybe not as fast as some people would like, but it seems like the province was making progress, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But people don't realize is that this has been going on for almost 60 years now. The Supreme Court of Canada in the 1970s, under the Calder case, recognized that my Aboriginal title did exist in this country. And then we went forward with the Sparrow case in the Musqueam that proved that Musqueam had a right to fish. Then we went to Delgamuukw. So we've been using the federal courts to prove our Aboriginal title and rights. And so we've come a long way, but then it's a little bit of the unknown of where this is going forward. And I think people need to understand that Indigenous people, First Nations people aren't here to impose their laws, impose who they are. I think that they want to bring it in lockstep with Western laws so that we can work together to create an even better and more inclusive community.
One thing I'm seeing that I think I find concerning, but obviously I want to hear what you think, is maybe a rise of denialism when it comes to residential schools. We know that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission basically categorized this as a genocide. We know that even Pope Francis recognized this as a genocide, but I'm starting to see political voices downplaying that word or that term. Are you seeing that as well? And I guess how do you feel about it?
I've seen it in many different places. I think that people need to understand that genocide has many different definitions. I mean, we think of genocide and the atrocities of the Holocaust in the earlier century, but genocide is anything that has to do with trying to eradicate a people, whether it be through putting them in places where their living conditions are no longer tenable, or taking their kids away, putting them in places where they're not allowed to speak their language, they're not allowed to practice their culture, they're not allowed to use their history anymore. These are ways of eradicating a generation so that next generation is not connected to who they are. The one thing that people don't realize is that the actual, I would say, tagline of the residential school was to kill the Indian in the child, to make them more Western.
Which sounds like genocidal intent to me.
Absolutely to me. And I think that, I understand that people are just starting to understand this because for far too long in this province and in this country, we didn't learn about these things. We didn't learn that this country treated their First Peoples in such an atrocious way. Mm-hmm. We want to be the bastion of human rights in the world, and I think that we can be, but we also have to recognize that we do have a dark past. We don't have to, we don't have to be vengeful about what happened. We can be angry, and we can make sure that it doesn't happen again.
Now, I don't think this, but I've seen voices that say, let's just move forward. Like, why are we still focusing on the past? There seems to be this overemphasis on the dark side of Canadian history, but we have a lot of issues right now. Let's move forward. When you hear that, why is it important that people understand this history for what it is?
Because this history is still showing tremendous effects of intergenerational trauma that I see today, even in my own communities. where my uncle, I'm lucky enough, my parents didn't go to residential school, but my uncle did. And then his nephew didn't have a father because his father didn't learn to be a father because he went to residential school, didn't have parents that he went home to. And so then he goes into the foster care system and then ages out, and he doesn't not know how to be a father, and then he becomes a father as well, and doesn't know how to be a parent. So we need to understand that we need to have more empathy, that there is still a lot of trauma that people are still facing today. Just because you didn't have a direct impact 100 years ago, we're still seeing the effects of them, and we can all come together to work together to heal those people so that they can be a better contributors to this country.
In the overall dialogue in BC political culture, do you think we're moving backwards when it comes to Indigenous issues or things around reconciliation?
I worked in the previous government with Christy Clark as her Indigenous advisor, and I thought I went there because I thought we were on the right track. We had a tremendous amount of momentum with the new relationship that the Gordon Campbell government put in place, creating the Indigenous Reconciliation Ministry. Those types of things hadn't happened before.
Right.
But I'm hearing unfortunately, from some leaders in this province about if they got in, that they would repeal the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act.
UNDRIP,
UNDRIP. And these are things that we've fought so hard to implement in here. For almost a decade, we've been fighting to have these things. And they were tremendous rallying cries for First Nations to come together with the rest of the province of British Columbia, to feel welcome, to feel part of the province. But to have that taken back, I think is a step in the wrong direction.
Now, I know this next question is going to be a bit loaded, but hopefully you can give me some direction here. When it comes to misconceptions that generally British Columbians may have when it comes to relationships with Indigenous people, what are kind of the key misconceptions that you really hope can be dispelled as soon as possible?
Well, I think as the chair of the First Nations Health Council, I represent the 203 First Nations in the province of British Columbia. And the one thing I always say is that we are not one people. The diversity of First Nations in this province is there's 203 First Nations, over 50 different language groups. We're not the same. Just because we're First Nations, I'm just as different from a Musqueam member as a person from the Debunking Nation in Cranbrook, BC, as a person from England is to South Asia. That's how different our cultures, our languages, our histories are. So don't group us in those types of things, but also recognize that we're not. I remember a story my mother told when she was early in her career, is that she asked people what they thought about reconciliation. The one thing that they were afraid of is that First Nations are going to come take their land back. That's not what's going to happen. That fear should be shot down right away. We want to just be part of this community. We want to make sure that we're creating a better society for the province and Canada.
Wade, a pleasure to chat with you. Thanks so much for your time tonight.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Mo.
Folks, representing the Musqueam First Nation, he is Wade Grant. Now up next, in an episode about equity and inclusion, we have to talk about the backlash, and I'll do that up next.